Yeah, so I just going to go over the course overview. Like I said, Canvas is new to me, but you guys should know it really well. That's where you can find everything as far as assignments and any new announcements. I doubt I'll do announcements, but we'll see. Maybe the weather or something. And then obviously you guys already got on Slack, and we use Slack at work. I'm assuming maybe some of y'all might use it already or not. But it's a really good communication. It's like Skype, but better. And I think it'd be great for. I think the department as whole. Right now, I'm focused. It's just us. But I think I'll have like me and Nat also use it if it works out. So we'll see how it goes. But if you guys need to communicate on like for the course, like the class itself, with everybody to see your messages, or you can just direct message someone or me, something like that. And of course, I'm sure there's ways to do that on Canvas, but Slack is, I don't know, I feel like it'd be easier.
Can I just say,
yeah?
So Slack is actually good to learn too, because everywhere that I've worked uses it.
True, that's a good one.
So like if you can jump in, like if you get a job, you can jump in and you know what's going on. It's pretty like.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of teams use it now. The first thing I'm going to go over is going to be Git and GitHub, and that's what I'll go over today. But if is Git or GitHub like y'all's daily routine to use, or yours is? It's good.
Yeah, awesome. I kind of forced myself to use it.
Great, awesome. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm not great, but.
No. I mean, yeah. You're
yeah.
working through it, so
yeah.
That's awesome. Perfect. So yeah, definitely keep that in mind. And then I'll be going over PHP, more like the basic stuff. And of course, everybody already knows PHP's free. It's open source. All the great platforms are built on it, which includes WordPress. There's also great libraries like CakePHP, which is basically like if you need to build an application outside of WordPress. There's plenty of them. There's another one called Laravel as well. It's a great decision to learn PHP, and there's also other great languages, but PHP, in my opinion, is the best because it's cheap. If you go anywhere else with any other language, you're going to spend money, and you're going to have to take courses, a lot of courses to learn it. So PHP is definitely, in my opinion, the good route to learn. Obviously, I'll go over more basic stuff like variables and conditionals. I know this is like very basic stuff. I'll be going over arrays, loops, and functions. Functions are the ones that I think we don't use as much, and I'll try to help guide you guys to how best to use them and when to use them. That way, it eliminates your code being like 10,000 lines or something like that. Do you guys do this a lot with like form handling, creating post requests, get requests, and things like that in those previous courses? Yeah? Okay. I misspelled it. There's an error right there. So error handling, that's like a big one. I don't know. This should be a practice that we all do, that we all implement. I'll be going over that as well. What's the best way in PHP to handle those errors? Like my slide. And then what about dependency managers? Is that something that you guys have gone over in previous courses here, or no?
No, not in the courses here.
Okay, so that's also very big. Same thing with like getting a job somewhere. You're gonna need to learn the biggest one is called Composer when you use PHP. So I'll be going over Composer, how to use it, and also what libraries interact with it. Like the one I mentioned earlier was CakePHP and also Laravel. Those are all libraries that use Composer a lot. And then of course MySQL and the SQL language. I know you guys had to learn that to create a WordPress site, but I'm just going to go over like basic stuff and also probably just some tricks on the SQL scripts that you can run, things like that. And of course the course project at the end where you guys will create your own dynamic website. We'll probably keep this one different. I'm not going to do anything that's everybody does the same thing. I had a few ideas, but once we get there, we'll make something that is interesting for everybody, and then also a great portfolio piece for you guys. All right, so I'm just gonna jump right in it. So it's gonna be our first thing is gonna be Git and GitHub, and so Git is a version control system which helps users keep entire code and history on a repository. I know you mentioned y'all use Git. What about you guys? Y'all use? Going through it, yeah. And so it's a version control system. I guess the best way to explain that is just you can keep versions of your files from the very beginning. So from start to end, you have a version of everything in its place. That includes video, that includes audio, files. It's not just text files. So it includes everything. So why do we care? And basically, let's see. Basically, if you screw up, you can roll back. That's really what is great. What it's great for. So if something went wrong, there's a specific timeline or a place in the timeline where you can roll back and get back to where everything was perfect. That's not the thing that you want to, or you don't want that to happen all the time. You don't want to roll back. There's ways to eliminate from you getting there, but in case things go wrong, technically there's ways to get back to a specific place in your Git repository. And also, it's built for teams. So you even if it's your own project and you're the only person working on it, you still want it. But if you have a team, which you will if you're working somewhere, you're gonna want to learn how everybody interacts with it and how you guys communicate using it. So like I mentioned about like the timeline, every time you make a commit, you're creating snapshots every time. So Git thinks of its data more like series of snapshots and of mini file systems. With Git, every time you commit or save a state of your project, Git basically takes a picture of what all your files look like at the moment and stores a reference to that snapshot. So to be efficient, if files have not changed, Git doesn't store the file again, just a link to the previous identical file as already stored. So in this picture, you can kind of see an example of that. If this one file B has no changes in 2 commits or 2 snapshots later, it's really just a reference to the main one. It's still there, so you can refer to that file when you're looking at this snapshot. You're not going to you're not going backwards. You still can view all the files, I guess linear-wise, but Git does not store the file multiple times. It stores it one time and just refers to it later on in every commit you make. Does that make sense? User changes, of course, every time we make commits. When working with teams, you're able to pull data from what other people have made. So you make changes, someone else makes changes, you guys are able to pull information in from other team members. For offline, it's really great because you don't need internet. You don't need the internet to be able to make commits and create files, things like that. So you can actually commit technically offline, and then once you're back online, you can push your changes out if your repository is stored elsewhere. But Git is stored locally, and you can work with Git with being offline. And then installing Git, this is also on Canvas. So there's a link for Mac and there's a link for Windows. And so you have a Mac and stuff. So yeah, there you go. And then also with Git, you can use command line for it. You don't need an application. So of course, there's plenty of GUI applications that allow you to work through it or or help you call out the commands for it. But you can do all that from command line. You don't need an application for it. One thing that was helpful for me was there's configurations in several aspects of the computer. So there's a system setting, and I put an example of what the Mac and Windows where they're located at. And so if there's so when I think of when you think of config, you should think of what text editor should be the default one. Just what general settings. When you create a new repository, you don't have to redo it or you don't have to re-enter it. There's already a config that's preset, and you can edit those configuration settings there on your computer. There's also a global user, so that would be your user settings, and then there's a project config file. So there's a project one, your user one, and then the system, like the computer-wide one. Hopefully you don't have to edit those, but they're there because of the programs. And then they're called repositories, like basically each project you create in Git. Think of it like a directory on your computer. That's essentially what it is, but they're called repositories. And you can take a local directory on your computer and turn it into a Git repository, or you can clone a repository that's stored elsewhere. So if you have a repository that's on GitHub, or it's on Bitbucket, or I don't know, if someone has it on a FTP URL or something like that, you can clone it using a clone command line. To initiate a repository, so like I said, the first method of creating a repository is just going to your directory and then calling git init. That would be the command line, and that basically creates like a empty skeleton per se of your repository. There's no files in it yet. That directory is now a Git repository. There's a hidden file called .git in there. I don't know how Windows does it, but on Mac you can't see it unless you show all your hidden files by default, which I don't know if you guys do or not. But that's where it exists. So it's in there, and that directory is just .git, and it has all your configuration files there. And then to clone one, you would just basically run git clone and then the URL. When you clone a repository, you clone everything, like from day one when that repository was created and when they made changes. You get basically you get all the snapshots of everything. These are some good statuses to learn, which is when a file is untracked, or basically Git doesn't know about it. That's basically the status that it's called. It's untracked. And then once you do track a file, the three main ones are unmodified, which is basically you've already committed, but there's no changes to it. Can you see that? And then there's modified, which basically you've committed previously, and then you made changes to it, so now it's a modified file. And then staged is you've modified the file, but you've put it in this. They call it staged. You're basically putting it in a place when you're right before you commit it. So it's not yet committed, but it's not modified anymore. So it's like right in between. And the reason why it's like that is it's really funny, and I guess it could be cool. So if let's say you make a change to a file, and then you stage it, you can remake changes to that file, but the one that's staged is different from the original file. So now you have two different versions without committing anything. So that's why modified and staged are different.
Sure, stage
Huh?
Like, say you don't commit something
Yes.
and it's staged.
Yes.
So you put it, you staged it. Does it track those? Like, say you made changes. Like, does it track both of those things, or it's just like once
Yeah,
you
like
stage it overwrites that previous stage? You know.
no. So the stage one stays as is, the way the way originally it was when you staged it. Any new changes are just in the modified version of it. So even though it looks like, so it just basically looks like you have duplicate files. So you have the staged version of it, and then you have the unmodified version of it. So, but it doesn't change. It doesn't override the staged version. You have to unstage it, and then it's back again with your latest changes, and then stage it, and then put it to stage again. Yeah. So yeah. So it's a good thing to learn.
That'd be more important with a group, right, as opposed to an individual user.
Well,
that would really come into play.
Here in this case, it's still your personal
Yeah.
part yet. So we haven't gotten to the teams yet. We haven't gotten to. So here it would be good if you in your so whether you use command line or you use a GUI app, it's good to know if you see a file, the same file you made changes to, and then you see it again. It's good for you to know, like, oh, this one's staged. I have not committed it yet,
Okay.
so let me unstage it and then stage it again. That way you don't get confused, like, why do I have two versions of it? Yeah. But team members won't see any of this yet. Until you make a commit and you push it,
Okay.
that's when they'll see your changes. And I'll go over that too in a bit.
The tracked and untracked,
Mm-hmm.
is that something like that you said in the on the file itself, or like in that separate?
So
Git?
So when whether you use command line and Git, and when you say like Git status, it'll show you a list of all the files, and it'll tell you which ones are tracked and which ones are not tracked. So basically, when a file's untracked, it's just basically like you just added it for the first time, and since Git doesn't know about it, it's going to mark it as untracked. And then the minute you commit that file, then Git knows about it, so now it's tracked.
It's not something you said. It's something that Git is doing.
Yeah, it's just like let's say you like everything's committed, there's nothing new, and you just like drop a file in there. That at that moment Git will tell you it's untracked, but you didn't program that or anything like that. Yeah, it automatically does that for you. Another big thing is ignoring files. So if you use Git and WordPress, there's files that you don't want to track. These files could be like, for example, on Mac, they do the .ds store hidden files. These are all like computer files. They're not anything you need to version. We don't want versions of that. If I'm a team member and you have like just random files that are not necessary, you should not commit those files. So this is a perfect way to ignore those files, so that way they're still in your computer. You might need them for some reason, but they're not something that's important to the project. To actually make a commit, you would basically run git commit. And then this, like we said earlier, it'll create a snapshot at that point when you make a commit. And this is still local, so you can do this without internet connectivity. And then when you make multiple commits, basically it just each snapshot is just pointing to the previous one. So it's just like an ongoing list of snapshots as you go through it. Now, remote repositories are the ones that are hosted elsewhere. So these repositories are on GitHub or elsewhere. They're just not on your computer. And the reason why they should, obviously, is if your computer crashes or gets turns into flames or something like that. I don't think these will, but yeah, you want your files to be stored in a stable location, and GitHub and Bitbucket are really great resources for that. I don't think you guys have anything here, right? To store like repositories. Louis?
We put GitHub Desktop on these, so
Yeah.
but other than that, I don't have anything special.
Okay, cool. And then to actually, so cloning is one thing. You're basically, you're just bringing in all the files, but you actually want to push your changes out to that repository, the online one. You have to add it. And here you would say remote add, and then a keyword, and then the URL. So I put an example prod, but prod could be anything. It could be staging, production, beta, whatever the idea is for you to clone it, or sorry, make changes to it. That's how you would connect to it. Once you're connected to it, you can then now run these commands, which is basically, they rely on a remote repository. You don't need to run Git Fetch, which, or the next ones I'm going to mention, because these only pertain to a remote repository. So Git Fetch will basically bring in anything that's been changed on the remote repository. So if you're on a team, someone else makes a change, you would run Git Fetch, and it would download the latest from there. Also, this doesn't work well all the time, because if you're a team member, you're going to edit probably the same file. For example, CSS is the worst nightmare for this. If y'all working on the same CSS file, Git is not great with, like, you're basically going to see conflicts. So when you deal with conflicts, you can either use a kind of like a diff checker or something like that, and it'll kind of like break it down for you to see, like, oh, okay, they added this CSS line, and I added this CSS line. But if you let Git, or the application you use to merge those changes, you can lose work, and it can get very dangerous. So I always say, like, communicate is the key. Like, just make sure you're on the same page with your team members. When you're gonna merge something, so merge is basically like what I mentioned. You have these changes that someone created. Now you're gonna merge them to your working copy. Hopefully there's no conflicts, but I'll tell you right now, there probably will. And the best way is to communicate. That's the best way. And Git pull does both of those. It fetches and merges at the same time. So if you do that, the program might merge those things on its own for you, or it'll warn you depending on the settings. But if it merges them for you, that could be potentially you lost work, that type of thing. But yeah, so you can use Git Fetch first, and then merge afterwards, or run this as well. If you know there's no changes or no possible conflicts, Git pull is easier because it runs both at the same time. And then Git push, after you commit it, Git push will actually push your changes to the remote repository. So commits are local. They're just sitting on your computer. You won't see them on the remote repository until you actually push them out. That's when you'll see them online. And then another big thing that you should definitely learn is how to create branches. This is like the command line to make it, so it's like git branch and then the name. You could name it whatever. So it's like a new feature, a bug fix, whatnot. You could label it whatever you want. But the advantages of that is when you create a branch, you then have your repository independent from everything else that's going on. So for example, like you can see here, this would be like the master branch right here. And when you create a branch, basically it kind of like sections off where you can make your changes and commits directly to it, and it won't affect the master branch. So usually those cases are for new features or bug fixes. And another cool thing about creating branches, you can pull your changes, or sorry, the master branch changes, you can pull them into your branch. So that way you're still up to date, but you're still working siloed out. And that's also a good practice too. And it's easy. And then another good practice with Git is when you do create branches, the good workflow is depending on who's kind of managing the project, you would create a thing called a pull request, and you're basically saying, okay, I made the new feature, or I fixed the bug, everything should be good now. There's no conflicts in my branch. It's good to go now. The person managing it will either tell you, oh, you know, there's actually something wrong, go ahead and fix it. Or if everything's good, they're just going to merge it to the master branch. And at that point, your branch is now part of the main one. And then tagging is also a great resource for like those snapshots that I was mentioning. You can see this on GitHub as well for all kinds of projects. So every time they release a new version, they'll call it like version 1.0.2 or something like that. And that's a good practice for your projects as well. That way you kind of have a place in the timeline that you know everything is working fine, or maybe before version 2 or something like that. And this is a good versioning system to use. And then I mentioned GitHub a lot. I feel like I'm getting paid or something. They're the largest web-based hosting service. They're not the only ones. They're just the biggest. They're the ones that I guess started for a long time. A lot of projects are on there. A lot of open source projects like Bootstrap. I mean, every project that you probably interacted with probably has a GitHub project that you can clone from. That you can clone and contribute to, and that's how all these projects. That's how all these projects have gotten where they're at, because of people like us that maybe that plugin doesn't work the way you want it to, so you can actually go in there and contribute to it. And if the owner of it or the one that manages it likes your new feature, they will implement it. So it's a really great way for the community to improve things, and that's how they get improved. And then the desktop app is the one that is really helpful because you don't have to use command line to do the things that I just mentioned. But you should definitely learn a few of them. That way you, when you're on this app or a different one, there's also another app called Source Tree from Atlassian or something. I forgot the name. Yeah. They also have one, but this one seems like the most easy to use and user friendly. So I was thinking if you guys wanted to get on the computers and go through the tutorial from GitHub and then kind of go through their step-by-step deal, and then after that we can go through creating a repository and then cloning the course one. But I'm assuming you guys have passwords and all that, right? Yeah.
So with GitHub, I have GitHub set up, and I just do the free version. So
yes.
Everything I do is public, correct?
Right. That's correct.
Okay.
It's public, and if you want private ones, I use well, you have to pay
Right.
I think like $7.99 at GitHub, but Bitbucket is free
Oh, is it?
for unlimited private repositories.
Interesting.
So I use
Bitbucket?
Bitbucket.
Okay.
And a lot of
also
companies.
has a student plan.
Oh, that's
where I
right.
want to say you get
Who does?
like GitHub.
Oh, do they?
That's true.
I think it's like 2 years or something like that for free.
Yes.
Oh.
Sign up with a student email.
And so you can get private repositories that way. Okay.
Yeah, that's true.
What happens after the 2 years though?
I think they charge.
Oh, but
They
they
just release everything?
expose you to the world.
Yeah.
They probably archive all your repositories. And also I noticed too, a lot of development teams in Austin, they use Bitbucket a lot.
Oh, interesting.
lot of free services. So yeah, if you haven't tried have you tried Bitbucket yet? I would try checking it out. It's essentially the same thing, but it's just, I guess, good to like kind of see how it's used and stuff like that. But yeah, no questions. You're all good.
Do you prefer that we do command line, or can we use the
Well, the tutorial. The tutorial is
command?
try.github.io, and if you go to it on one of y'all's computers, you actually have to type it out.